Good morning to some of you, and good afternoon and good evening to others. And from Thailand, Ratri Sawat. It is a real pleasure to be moderating the launch of this book, which is, I think most of you will agree, who've either read it or at least been involved in it, a refreshing and compelling book. We're very lucky to have both Mark and Lavinia with us, who produced the book. And I hope that we're going to find out a little bit more about the writing of the book, the writing and editing of the book process during this evening, and have some time to hear from some of the interviewees who are present here with us. And thank you for being present. As Mark said, there is a sample chapter which has been released. It is a particularly moving chapter, and I'm sure that if you read it, you will be inspired to actually buy the book. It is a beautiful chapter, and the link to the chapter is in the chat. If you'd like to buy the book during the course of the meeting, the link is also in the chat, and there's a 20% discount on that link if you use the password or the code persona. When I said the book was refreshing and compelling, I think that it's refreshing because I don't think I've seen anything like this before. There are some really good interviews out on YouTube. I mean, Laura London, who was originally going to host this launch, has produced a wonderful series of very personal interviews with Jungian analysts, and they're really worth seeing. And of course, there are others. And who can forget that famous film series? What was it called? Memories of Jung or Encounters of Jung? Beautiful series. Actually, you can buy it on the C.G. Jung Institute of Analysis website. You can buy chapters there and interviews with some of the very early analysts. But this book still feels fresh because it brings together some lovely interviews, very personal interviews, in some ways more personal than some of the other interviews that I've just spoken about, and with a very specific objective, and that is to get behind persona. That is really, I think, our patients who sit with us in the room after room. Okay, yes, we are in the confines of the contained relationship and the analytic attitude, but actually isn't what really heals our patients, what really gets them back on track, their encounter with the real us. Didn't Jung say that it is the personality of the analyst that is the deciding factor? And so that's why I think this book is so fascinating, because of course we meet these people, and we know these people professionally, but in this way, in this book, we almost get to encounter them in a way like their patients would encounter them. Of course, their patients don't know these personal details about their lives, but I suppose as experienced analysts, we can read from those details and from those stories what it would be like to be in the presence of that person. That was why I think this book is so refreshing and actually also so compelling. And I think it's a fascinating project. I mean, Lavinia, how did you first come to think of a project like this?
Thank you very much. I'm somehow beyond overwhelmed because I, along with Mark, managed to finish this project, which I don't think it's finished yet, because somehow in all of us will work something. I was thinking very much about this question. How did I start? What was the idea behind it? Why did I choose this topic and so on? And I believe there are a lot of answers, but I have to admit that there is something related to my childhood, and I have to, I'm very pleased to be able to share it with everyone, also as a honor that I want to do to my grandparents that were there to raise us. And I want to bring a memory related to the fact that as a child, when my grandfather went away to another city, especially in the capital, in Bucharest. We are not from the capital. We expected him to bring us something very good when he returns. Usually he brought us some candies called chip. It's not on the market anymore, so I'm not marketing for it. But okay, so we were waiting for him very much. So not for his return, but for the candies. Okay, so because I felt somehow extremely privileged to be able to travel and attend some lectures in seminars in Zurich, both in CG Jung Institute and ISAP, and have there my analysis, my supervision. And I'm very, very glad to say hello to a lot of people that were there for me as well when I asked them to be part of this project. Okay, so I thought that is extremely important to share some of my encounters with my colleagues back at home. You know, the joy of meeting such important teachers who influenced me at least. And afterwards, this started. After I met some people that agreed to share with me this idea of them being interviewed as a child.
Who was the first person you actually interviewed as part of this process? And when you interviewed them, did you know that it was going to be a part of a book project?
Just for the first time, I did not know that this is going to be the book, but I believe one of the first, if not the first, was John Hall. He was teaching in CG Jung Institute on the collected works, and I was extremely impressed with him. And right after him came Mrs. Bolen, Jean, and that were interviews happening in 2012, because this is something that I need to say. It's a very long project. Maybe the last few years were the longest, I would say, from the perspective, let's say, personal perspective point of view, but also in the beginning, I was extremely and genuinely interested in gathering as many stories as possible, because I was fascinated by these people. I said to myself, they were children once, you know. Were they as fascinating as they are in this moment when I'm seeing them? And I was really, really curious of how they grew up and what were their education, what actually brought them to become Jungian analysts, but not only, such an lovely and inspiring people. So I believe in 2012, there were my first interviews included in this book. And I have to admit that there were some more before, around 3 or 4, but I did not keep in contact with those people because I did not know that this is going to grow into a book.
Yes. At this point, I just need to admit another embarrassing thing, and that is we were meant to have been recording this meeting from the beginning. So I'm now going to begin the recording. So, yes. Just
recording in progress.
Back to you, Lavinia. I was just thinking when I was reading the book and reading your interviews, and I was thinking, how would I feel about being in Lavinia's seat? I mean, you were interviewing people who you could actually say in many ways are master interviewers. What was that like? Did you notice yourself slipping into the role of being the interviewee rather than the interviewer at times?
As a matter of fact, no, as I didn't, because I mentioned to them that they were kind enough, or gentle enough not to switch roles. Of course, all of them could knock me off, you know. I was, and I'm still a no name comparing to those huge names that I included in the books. And I have to admit that it was a personal choice. And I picked the most inspiring people, for me at least. Okay, so again, I was not feeling interviewed. Maybe there is an exception, and I told him, and it's not a secret to say that Andrew Samuels made me answer some questions at the first. And not only, for instance, Mrs. Bora Kuczynski also asked me some questions, Dieter Bauma asked me some questions in order to set the stage, but not in the interview. So they did not change the atmosphere, the energy. They were extremely nice and generous, and extremely into their role of being interviewed. They entered immediately into this invitation that I made for them with a kindness that I could not repay ever. But I'm sure that through their impact, a lot of people will thank them for them being so open.
Yes.
And can I mention something more here?
Of course.
Yes. I believe it's very important to say that I never saw them as great names from the moment I started the interviews. I was starting to talk with the child within them. That's why I was not as, let's say, inhibited as I could be, because definitely I could be inhibited by a person, name it. I mean, pick one name and I could be inhibited by any of them. But I started to refer to them as a child, as a teenager. I really wanted to know things about their childhood.
I think that the interview process must have been so fascinating, and that such an enlivening project for you that it could have just gone on forever. At what point did you know that it was time to make it into a book?
Well, I believe
begin the production process.
Well, I believe it was not very long into the process of interviewing, because I said, oh, such a story, I cannot let it go. I mean, I cannot really, I have to share it with, at least with my colleagues, but not only with them. In Romania, we are a lot of people interested in Jungian analysis, and I'm very glad that we are so many. But I said 100, for instance, is not enough. Why don't we share it with other colleagues in other geographies? But I believe here, my supervisor, Mr. Stein, Marie Stein, thank you very much, Marie, for having this courage, giving me this courage. I believe he suggested at one point, why don't I make it into a book? Oh. And he's here, and I'm sure that he's really happy for me, and I'm really glad that at least he suggested. But I believe I had this idea, but I didn't have the courage. And he said, why not? Why not? Start, do it, do that, yeah.
And then what did you do? How did you find Routledge?
Well, that's another very long story, because of course I had in mind that this should be a book. And I knew that I could not write it in Romanian, because definitely not so many people would be having access to it. And well, how did I find Routledge is the second question. How did I find Mark? It's the first question.
There we go.
Because he was the one, let's say, really helping a lot with this coming to life of this volume. Okay. And I found Mark in a lecture. He was, I mean, I was one of the students he had in one lecture. And I told him that when something is meant to be, God is working his way. I mean, I lost the train to Zurich, and I returned to the institute, and I entered into Mark's class. If I weren't losing my train, maybe I wouldn't met Mark. And Mark made a mark on me, I would say. And I said, what a rigorous and very organized person. And I actually fantasized about having him helping me with this book for years until I reached him. And we together reached Routledge in the conference in Vienna, where they had a stand, a book stand. And from that point on, it really started the war between us, actually.
Oh, right.
I was the most difficult person. Mark was the, let's say, midwife, as I like to call him.
Well, Mark, what was your experience? And remember to unmute yourself. What was your experience of coming on board with this project?
There's a number of, I remembered Lavinia from the class she attended in 2014, and we'd had a couple of email exchanges, I think, in the interim. But this isn't typically the sort of project I take on. And so I was a little bit hesitant at first, but I could see that it was really important to Lavinia. And I didn't think it would take very long, actually. I thought this would take about a year to do, and I was between books, and I thought it would be fine. And it took a lot longer. It took about 3 years in the making. And probably if I had known on the front end, I probably would have said no. But I'm glad that I didn't. And it's one of those things of God or the self intervening or guiding. And I think it's really turned out to be a wonderful book. And it was a struggle. We fought at times or argued at times because we were approaching it from different perspectives.
All right.
Lavinia's heart was very much in the material. And so naturally, she wanted to preserve as much of the material as she possibly could. And I was telling her we had to cut certain things. And so there was an initial argument. And twice during the process, I threatened to quit. And I said to her, well, if we can't come to an agreement on this, I need to leave the project. Eventually we came to a meeting of minds, and usually those were mainly over cuts. And we turned in a manuscript. Actually, we cut before we turned in the manuscript, but we turned in a manuscript for 140,000 words, and our contract was for 90,000 words. And our Routledge editor said, no, this isn't going to do, and said, you need to cut it down to 90,000 words. And I tried, we tried, and I cut 13,000 words from it and turned in a revised manuscript of 126,000 words. And at that point, I made an appeal to Katie, our editor, Katie Randall, our editor, that became the back cover of the book, that I'd just like to read for a moment, because I really believe every word of this. Each interview also focuses on covering the person beyond the professional persona. The interviews are compelling, significant figures in analytical psychology. Their stories interact with significant events and time periods in world history. Stories which are interwoven with World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Arab-Israeli wars, the Vietnam War, the counterculture movements of the 1960s, women's rights, fascism, communism, immigration, spirituality, slavery, racism, trauma, sexual orientation, and poverty. The scope of the lives captured in this volume is moving and inspiring. And Katie said, yes, you can have 126,000 words.
Who wouldn't after hearing that, Mark? Yes. Well, you spoke about cuts. You know, between the two of you, are there interviews that were cut or sections that were cut that you think actually, even now, you wish you could have included?
I have to again make another statement. I'm not going to name to give names, but I have to admit that there were more than 18 interviews. There were around 25 interviews. And I have to admit that all the other ones were not cut. Some of them withdrawn from the project. Some of the people, when they saw their stories that they told, said, "Oh, this is too personal. I cannot put this in an open public thing." But how can you get from me this out, you know? But people indeed wanted to, let's say, some of them, 3, I would say, wanted to withdraw, and the other one, 4 actually, and the other ones we did not include. And through all the cuts, something from me also was cut because not the time, but the spirit of the words being said.
So it sounds as though editing was quite a difficult process compared to doing the interviews.
Well, indeed it was. I mean, not only for me, it was difficult because I needed to transcribe all the interviews. And at that point, it was difficult because I'm not an native English speaker. Some of my interviewees were not English speakers. As a matter of fact, only from 18 interviews, we have 9 nations covered. So 9 countries, so to say, from which I would say that 4, 8, 10 of them were only native speakers. So the other ones needed to be somehow transcribed in a quite difficult manner. Afterwards, after I cut some things, after I rephrased this, Mark's work started, and that was extremely hard because it was very, very difficult to give a round shape to the interview with which all the interviewees to agree, because after we finished the script for one interview, we would send it to the interviewees. He or she would give their permission. In some instances, for instance, I went back to the interviewee. I worked again along with the person on the interview. It was not very easy.
Mark, you were not only one of the editors, but you're also one of the interviewees. How did that happen?
That's a bit of an amusing story that I think we can reveal at this point. There were actually 2 conclusions, a conclusion from Lavinia that we kept as it was, and a conclusion from the editor's perspective, my perspective as co-editor. And we did have a late drop, and the number 18 is significant in Romania. And Lavinia asked if she could turn my conclusion into an interview. And she masterfully shaped my conclusion into an interview in a way that I think is rather remarkable and creative. I'll mention that it was enjoyable hearing it as that interview, actually, because I guess I wrote it wanting to make a few comments about my own path into the analytic world and the uncertain path we all take into the Jungian world. And in some ways, we see that paralleled in Nora Swan Foster's foreword to the book, in which she captures a number of the salient essences of the book, but also weaves in her own story in a way that becomes a 19th interview as well.
And if we count the fact that I also revealed some parts of my childhood and include some of the encounter with Mrs. Van Herne Jung, actually the proto interview, I would say, the first interview I did in 2009 or 10, I don't even remember, that would make 21st interviews in this book, and this is the coming into age in the United States as well.
I must say, I'm thinking now, we do have several of the interviewees present, and you just mentioned Nora Swan Foster, who, and I just wonder what it was like to, clearly some people, when they saw their stories presented to them, the transcripts of interviews presented to them, they were somewhat caught off guard by how candid they'd been. I'm wondering whether others present who have actually gone through with the process and whose stories are printed in this book, I wonder how they're feeling. I wonder if any of the people who are interviewed would like to talk about what it's like to read their story in the book.
Maybe you can start by naming them, because they are shy,
okay, well,
shy children. Let's start with Murray. What do you say?
Well,
Murray?
Andrew said something very interesting in response to reading the book. He said, I didn't know Lavinia had seduced so many other interviewees as well as myself. Lavinia is an extraordinary interviewer. She has a way of drawing stories out of, this is my experience, out of me that I wouldn't have told to anyone else, and I had to cut a few things, actually. It was just an entry into childhood, and a bit like an analytic session. You know, you just start telling your story, your narrative, without inhibition, feeling a very safe space, but knowing that it can be retracted, it can be taken back, it can be edited. So I felt very safe. Like I had known Lavinia for a period of time, and felt very comfortable with her anyway. But reading these interviewers, though, I really do get a sense for Lavinia's genius at pulling stories out of people without being rude or obtrusive or intrusive, but just staying on the scent. She's like a hunter. She gets her nose starts twitching and she goes for the game. She knows where it is and she pulls it out of the forest.
I must say, there were a few times reading those chapters, I did wonder, it did feel quite forensic.
Yes. Yeah, she'd be a very good forensic interviewer, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe I am. You know, in Romania, you never know who the Secret Service is. All the time they are saying that. But it was a real pleasure to have all of you, because all of you were interviewed in very different situations. Murray, we were interviewed. I took your interview in a restaurant. I took the interview with Jean in a garden. I took John's interview in his room. His hotel room, if you can realize that. I took Avi's interview after a lecture he gave us in Bucharest. So really in a very, very different manners. I interviewed all of you. So if any one of you can and want to share their impression, Jean maybe, or Nora, please.
I'm sorry, I wasn't unmuted.
Yes.
I was so honored to be invited, and I had known that Mark was working with Lavinia on this and was very curious about how it was going. And so I'd every so often just hear a little bit about it and the process that you both were working on. And then Mark emailed me and said, would you be interested in writing a foreword? And of course I was surprised and so honored. And he sent me several of the interviews, and I was just blown away by the brilliance of how Lavinia did carry out these interviews. Just so very creative and right, getting to these kernels of, as you said, the childhood and things that we just do not normally see behind the persona. So I felt quite inspired by the interviews to be able to have that opportunity to explore some of the ideas that Mark and I talked about that needed to be in the foreword, and how could they be interwoven and fit into the book overall as a style, you know. So I had quite a lot of fun with it. It also kind of worked me, you know. I had to keep editing out and find the theme, and because Lavinia wasn't interviewing me, but I wanted it to kind of fit in with the style of the book. So it's been such a delight to read these interviews. I have it by my bed, so I read it, you know, kind of one at a time and take it in. But I thank you for inviting me to be part of this project. I think it's brilliant, and I think there should be a volume 2. It sounds like there's still content, but anyways, yeah.
Well, thank you for participating, Nora. You certainly brought your own skills as an author and as an editor to the project. So thank you for being involved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. It was real pleasure and an honor. For me, from Romania, having the honor to have the editor-in-chief of JAP for the Americas, that was like a dream came true. And when Mark suggested your name, I was like, oh, wow, if he is going to accept, that's excellent, brilliant. Thank you so much, Nora.
Well, you're welcome. But I think you point to something as you say that really, you know, that's a persona. And so as you read my foreword, right, there's the person behind. And I think that's what we're all kind of looking for and finding so much enjoyment in. So
yes, but your interest in working with children and with art really match together, because that's an art, to interview someone, not to disturb someone, not to disturb the mystery of their childhood, but still bring it on. So it's an art. And I really believed that you as an writer for the foreword brings together so many things that this book is about. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And maybe someone else can share with us, maybe Jean or John or Avi.
I think Jean was ready to go.
Right.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, I'm delighted to meet you, Lavinia, on this, because we've had about 3 different, I think, over time. It's been well over a decade and so that combined with working for about the last 8 years on writing a memoir has stimulated and made me recollect and write about the childhood to write a memoir when you're getting into your mid-80s seems to provide quite a long range, which I just did. And I just finished the manuscript and sent it to be copy edited last week. So I've been immersed myself in what has a tentative or real title of ever widening circles and mystical moments in my life. And so I have realized that in the multiple decades of doing, being a psychiatrist and then being a Jungian analyst, I was trained by Freudian analysts in my education to not reveal much at all about myself. And then because I am purely Japanese American, or Japanese, I'm a Japanese American, that tradition is that you keep your persona on. So between the Freudians and the Japanese, I don't say very much about myself at all in my work with individuals, but I do speak about my feelings, and I obviously can't do a blank screen that I got trained to try to do when I was an intern, a resident at San Francisco. So I just submitted my completed memoir called Ever Widening Circles and Mystical Moments.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing just seems really fine that after all these years, first, Lavinia, you invited me to say a lot of personal things, which no one ever has done either. So between working on my memoir and your interviews, because didn't we talk about 3 different times over a decade? Something like that.
Yes, I remember. I was fascinated by your talk on goddesses, and I said, "Oh, I have to have this. I have to have this goddess in my book. So I have to do it now. If not now, when?" And yes, your Japanese style, it really is distant, quite serious like this. But I said, why don't I take the courage and ask you? You can only reject me, but it is worth trying. So thank you so very much for taking your lunch break between the 2 parts of the course and share it with us. And this really turned into a very, in a great interview. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Maybe I should step in.
Please.
Yes, John.
Thanks. It's really nice to see so many friends here, and hello to Mark. I haven't seen you for many years, but admired your work as it's developed, and so nice to be part of it. When Lavinia first interviewed me, I was in Kyoto at the Congress, and as I heard her, she was in effect a newspaper reporter from Romania, and there's a part of me that's never grown up. So I'm still living in the 1950s when I was that 13-year-old that you see in the book, and I thought, well, this will just be behind the Iron Curtain. It really won't hurt. And so I had no idea what would come, but I felt very free in Kyoto talking to someone in Romania that would appear, perhaps, she said, in a newspaper in Romania. Well, here we go, and happy to be just there. And I just love the way life works. 7 years later, I am so proud to be part of a book that is sure to be banned in Florida. It makes me extremely happy to think of this book being banned. And boy, America has some great interviewers. Back in 1960, a man named Mike Wallace, who I had already gotten to know, he used to be on television with his wife, Buff Cobb, and Mikey and Buff, and they're just a husband and wife talking on the radio and on television in the morning in the 50s. But around 1960, something called the Mike Wallace Interview appeared, and suddenly, at the same time, America was getting into confessional poetry, and different poets in America began to talk so personally about themselves for the first time. The name Anne Sexton comes up as a classic example. And America went very personal. The Mike Wallace interview was intrusive at a level that no one had ever been before on national television. And then there were these women that came after. One of them is Barbara Walters, and the other today is Terry Gross. And when they're very famous in America and perhaps getting more and more around the world, and they really just have a way of getting you to say, getting you well beyond anything you might be professionally or personally. But Lavinia, you really take the cake. I have to say that you have a way of just zeroing in. So the title Beyond Persona is just really, really good.
Yeah.
Frankly, it took me back. You could say it took us back to what a wonderful job was done for C.G. Jung, you know, whatever is said about Analia F.A. maybe making Jung nicer, and I'm absolutely sure she did. His letters get so much warmer after she was his secretary, and she brought an extroverted feeling that he never had. But what you took me back to was not that book, but actually my first hour with Joseph Henderson, which was one of the great moments in my life, because I went to see Joe with a great deal of, I mean, I was kind of in awe of him. And I remember looking at him and saying in the very first hour, I said, you know, I feel like you've always been here. I mean, I think I thought of him as Ancient of Days. I think he was actually only at that time about, 71 or 2. But for me at that age, he was ancient, and he certainly carried that authority. And then before he could say anything else, I said, you know, the thing I've always liked about you is that you've never given a damn about what other people think. And what I was referring to at that point was something that was quite obvious about Joe Henderson. He was a very effeminate man, and in some ways had a very unfortunate persona in some ways. David Stockford, who was a Jungian analyst who was gay, and said to him, I feel so sorry for Joe Henderson, he's so Nelly. And I said, and I was offended. I said, well, he's not Nelly, he's prissy. He said, well, what's the difference between Nelly and prissy, said David Stockford. But in any case, Joe had that. Many people said that about Joe. So I was more or less quoting someone who said of someone, he doesn't give a damn about what anyone thinks. So I laid that on Joe, and Joe said, well, I've always been sort of, and then he got tongue-tied and stopped speaking, and then he cleared his throat. Then he tried to say something again, and he also cleared his throat. And of course, I was there for my first hour, and I'm John Beebe, and I just went on talking and talking as I'm doing right now, as if he'd done nothing at all. And then finally he said, well, you know, he said to me, leaning forward, the reason I got tongue-tied right now is that it wasn't really true. I had to go away to school when I was 14 years old, and boarding school, and I had to defend myself. And I put on a poker face, and I got rather too good at it. And that moment was the moment at which it became possible that this man would not accept a false idealizing transference, as previous analysts of mine had done, to no good. I'd already had enough of that from my parents. And that was the moment at which I believe I had a chance to get over my neurosis, and I will never, ever forget it. So thank you for this book.
Incredible.
Thank you for this book.
What a
It'll help
wonderful
others.
story. And
Thank you.
and
Thank you,
so
John.
many wonderful stories in this book too. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Maybe
I
we
think-
could hear from Avi.
Yes.
Yes, if you can unmute yourself, Avi. Yes, now.
First, I want to thank Lavinia for accepting my interview to the book, and it was very exciting to have this interview. And I want to thank for another thing is that when I told my story to Lavinia, I think it was in 2 times, no, or something.
Yes.
It helped me to accept my story better with myself. I think there was something in this telling and knowing that this will come in a book. It was something that helped me to accept more some part in my story, which when you tell it and when you know it will come out into the world, it makes you to think again about certain things. And I was more accepting myself in a way. So in this moment of the interview and afterwards and the whole process, because you take your story and you give it to the world and you open up and so you accept more yourself in this action, in this interview. That's point. And I think as a Jungian, especially in this part of my age, and when I'm almost 80 in 3 years, so it's very good to know that you accept your story and everything, even things you didn't tell to other people, is there and it's okay, something like that. And I think also that for a Jungian analyst, it's very important that the story will be all the time part of the process that they are doing with the patient.
Yes.
As we know about the wounded healer and all kinds of things that are going in the therapy unconsciously. So I think the personal things is very important, and the more you accept yourself is something that made you and make you feeling more good as a therapist.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm pleased to make it, that I made it. And I think Lavinia was a good partner for making the interview. She's very curious. She knows how to make you speak, and she accepts everything, and she knows how to ask the questions, and how to go into all kinds of things which are typical for you in your world. And I felt very good with her. So again, thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you who've been who appear in the book and who've been here today to speak about the book. And I'm sure everyone who's in the meeting cannot but be moved by the things that you've said. And it shows what an important project it is and how alive this book actually is. So I really encourage you, if you haven't bought a copy yet, to buy a copy. It is. I go back to what what Jung says about the personality of the analyst being so important, and I think that as a community, and I think it's important that we begin to more and more to understand that we are a community, a growing community. As a community, it's important that we know we understand our lineage. I've often wondered why there isn't a project for us to all record who our supervisors and analysts are, so there can be a family tree going all the way back. Because it's so important. I mean, what is the work that we do? It's about the development of character. And so it's so important and so generous of you here to have shared that with us, because it's not only interesting, it's not just vicarious pleasure. I think this is an important historical document. And I hope that there will be more like this in the future. Anyway, so thank you all for speaking. I wonder now if we could open up to questions from participants, and these will be questions directed to, I think, to Lavinia and Mark primarily. So I'm going to remove the spotlight from the other attendees, and so that Lavinia and Mark can take questions from participants. Give me a moment just to trim down the panel.
And until then, I want to say exactly that the history, the personal history is very important, but also the collective history, because this shapes a field in which each of us are growing and are developing. And we should not forget the context in which one is growing and developing. So yes, I'm again extremely grateful to all of you that wanted to share this with me and the world. And please, if you have any questions, we are here to answer them.
You can put your questions in the chat, or you can try to use one of the reaction icons. I might not think you can raise your hand, or I should see it. Or just unmute yourself and speak up.
Until people are getting more courage to address us at least one question, not to feel awkward in this question and answer session, I'm going to say a very big thank you to everyone that in the book that managed to, and then maybe announce to the other ones that did not have the chance to buy yet the book, managed to find pictures with them when they were young or very young, because this is a part of the book that I really, really enjoyed, to receive pictures of such a great thinkers or professors when they were 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. So you can really see the spark in their eyes. And, you know, yeah, excellent, excellent choice to include that. Yes, Mark, please.
I think Carolyn Bates has a question.
Yes. First, I would very much like to thank all of you for putting this on. Stephen, I don't know if you were the, anyway, those of you who put this on, and for the book itself. It is, I look forward to reading it. I have not yet read it, but this is just a lovely introduction. I am curious, of course, this may be a projection onto what I'm hearing, but given what the interviewees have said about it, I am curious as to whether or not it might prove to be a teaching aid for how we interview and work with and draw forth our analyses. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on that, Lavinia and Mark.
Mark, because you are very much into the techniques and methods, I'm going to give you the floor first, and I'm going to answer later. So please.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful idea, Carolyn, because Lavinia does go to the unexpected, I think, for many of the interviewers, and she finds an angle to get underneath certain things or deeper into certain things that is both sometimes pressuring at times. Certainly you can feel Lavinia's curiosity and her heart in the questions. And I think that's the essential part of it. As I was reading through it, you know, as the editor, I probably wouldn't be as the interviews I would have done wouldn't have been as interesting as Lavinia's, because I would have been in my persona as an interviewer, so to speak. And so there would be something that would block the some of the aspects of that. So I'm probably not the good person to ask about this.
I can say only like this. In so many ways and moments, we hear that in Eastern Europe countries, we are behind the civilized world, the Western world, and so on and so forth. So we are behind a little bit with politically correctness as well. So actually, I allowed myself to ask questions that normally people wouldn't ask. I was not without, I did not, I was not impertinent or how Murray very nicely put, I was not stepping the line. I knew when to stop. Even if a lot of people really challenged me with their sometimes lacunar answers, some of them really wanted to keep it low, but I did not push. I just asked, but why? And now, but why? We we are with children. The children are allowed to ask why. Why don't we? Because I really wanted to understand why. It's sometimes is a banned question to say why, but why, but why, but why, to be so inquisitive. But being extremely curious about their reality made me ask several whys. And when I saw that it's a bit painful, or maybe they don't want to enter there, or one person even said, I don't want to go there, I stopped. But some of the people wanted a reason to enter there. So maybe they looked for the reason to enter there. So thank you very much, Carolyn, for this question. Actually, really honors me to know that maybe starting from this book, people will start to learn, or to be like an introduction to the questioning or the anamnesis, the anamnesis in our first sessions. And I believe that the main word here is authenticity. I really wanted there to find their authentic self. Really, I was not pleased with, not that I got too many, but I got some of the answers that are politically correct, and I said, okay, let's keep that and go back to the question, why don't you, so on and so forth,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I believe we have a question from Andre. Say, how would you explain the picture on the cover? It looks really good. Mark, do you know the process of choosing the picture? Do you remember?
Yes. Routledge gives us access to a database of images, and we have to select one of those images. So we each independently went through the images, and we each selected 4 or 5 that we thought would work. And then we found that this was both of our favorites. And initially they told us it wasn't available. And then they came back and told us it was available. So we were delighted. But the image itself we selected because it has a bit of a mystery about it. And the whole idea of individuation is what we're walking towards, what we're moving towards. And we felt that this figure, this silhouette figure walking into this transom, into the cosmos, well captured the sense of Jung's idea of individuation, and that it's always a mystery of where we're going. It's not where we want to go, it's where we're led, where we're pulled.
personally, I was drawn by this figure. Later on, I was about to find out that there is also a cross here, as you can see. But mostly because the light is coming after, I mean, the light is coming to you after you move beyond, so to say, beyond, and this is the persona for me. The black thing is the persona. Beyond persona, there is a life. That's beyond and behind. Not being an English speaker, although I have to admit this name, Beyond Persona, came to me in the morning. When I woke up, I don't know if I dreamt anything or something, but I woke up, maybe that was in 2013, with this name in my head. And I said, this is the name of my book. And I didn't know that beyond or behind or above or below or whatever is what I meant, but is something like strip away of your persona and you'll find the light. That's actually the explanation of the cover. And thank you for this question. Yes, it's really impressive for us as well.
There are no more questions coming from the floor. So again, I'd like to just thank everyone for attending. I hope that you're feeling inspired to not only buy the book, which of course is one of the main reasons for us to talk about it in this meeting, but that you'll think about the project and think about its potential impact on your life. Think about your story and how you came to Jung, because I think that what Lavinia started here and what Lavinia and Mark have worked on and given to us is something that I hope that we will become, we'll have, as Jean was saying, have ripples and circles, and that we'll see more volumes like this. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, especially those who were interviewed in the book. And I don't know whether Mark and Lavinia have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yes, I would really like to thank Audrey, because Audrey is also here, Audrey Punet, and maybe Audrey, if you can say just a few words, because she was one of the people that kindly accept our invitation to write a review for our book that is on the cover. And Audrey, if you are here and you want to say some things, please. And she specializes in children, and I'm so glad that she accepted. Please, and if you can.
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you and Mark on this wonderful contribution to the Jungian community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you, Audrey, very much.
Well, with that, I think all of our thanks go to Mark and Lavinia. Mark, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Stephen, for agreeing to host this event. And we hope that, I think there's plans in the future for other events like this from the Jungian.Directory that sponsored this. And I certainly look forward to listening to other people's virtual book launches through this venue. So thank you, Stephen, and for being such a gracious
Mark.
host.
Thank you for inviting me.
Indeed, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good night from Thailand, and I hope you have a good day wherever you are.